Hello, Narnach here. Welcome to version 2 of my Theorycraft for the Ice Shot Ranger. Version 1 was made after a quick brainstorm with Twitch chat after ripping my Wild Striker. This one, it's been a week later. I've got a lot of input from the community and I spent most of the day actually just working out all kinds of details, doing a bunch of math, comparing a whole bunch of different skill gem setups, and as a result this build should be a lot better than the previous one. So let's start with the highlights, the big changes, and then we're going to go into the nitty-gritty details. First of all, a Val Pact. It is very useful. So far I've been playing lower damage builds, well, as in less than 30,000 damage per second. Emily with Leech, that was rather sustainable. This bow build is capable of doing about 200,000 DPS against bosses when all flasks are up, when the boss is shocked, when all curses are up, or when just everything is in our favor. We're doing the 200,000 DPS. As a result, we're doing a boatload more damage, and it's pure cold damage. If there's reflect on the map, we're gonna get 20% of that back in our face. All the reductions apply, but long and short of it is that we're gonna get a lot of damage in return, and I don't quite think our Leech is capable of countering that, and especially because the Leech, it takes a while to kick in. So if you got Val Pact, then at least you will instantly leech your life, and after that the reflect kicks in. There's a little bit of an ordering mechanic. You first leech and then reflect kicks in. So if your life is not at max, but let's say it's at half of your life, and you do a bunch of damage, then the leech from Val Pact should probably just push your life back to maximum, and after that you take reflect damage, so you have less of a chance of actually killing yourself via reflect. So Val Pact, very useful for this build. For any build basically that does a boatload of damage. Another one that was pointed out is that Pierce is pretty darn useful for just clearing maps. So this nice little arc over here is going to give you 50% chance to pierce with projectiles. In the ascendancy tree over here, once you have completed Merciless Labyrinth, I'm going to pick a powerful Precision. This one gives you an additional 100% chance to pierce starting at an arrow's movement. Arrows move 120 distance units in the game. The first 10 of those units it will have 100% chance to pierce. After that, so from 10 to 100, it's going to linearly decline from 100% added to 0 added. So if you combine all of that with the 50% pierce from this, that effectively means that up to a distance of 65 units, you will be doing 100% pierce, and after that, it's gonna decline down to 50%. So that means you will most of the time be piercing, unless the enemies are a bit further away, and your crit chance is increased by a pierce chance, so this effectively adds 100% pierce, which is pretty darn useful. And of course, if you pierce, you can hit multiple targets with a single arrow. So, there's that. If you're going to use Val Pact, that means Life Leech is no longer a thing, or Life Regeneration is no longer a thing. As a result, the Stone Golem that we picked before, not a good choice, because the main reason you pick Stone Golem is because of the Life Regen. Yes, it taunts, but that's a secondary effect that's not entirely reliable. If you want something to taunt, you pick a Decoy Totem. So Stone Golem is out and Ice Golem is in. Ice Shot, Ice Golem, nice thematic coincidence. But the important thing is Ice Golem gives you an increased chance to crit and it boosts your accuracy. So Ice Golem is simply just going to help you hit and crit more often. So there's a little bit of a win over there. Secondly, we're dual cursing. I have a nice pair of Windscream boots that give you an additional curse on enemies. The Windscreams, I actually have them, or just a generic pair of Windscreams over here. They have 15% movement speed, I did receive the feedback that, yeah, windscreen, in theory, it's a nice thing, but compared to 30% movement speed, 15% feels rather sluggish. For now, we're simply gonna try it, and if, in the end I decide like, yeah, indeed, it is too sluggish, we might flip things around. But having 2 cursors at your disposal is simply really, really nice. Okay, so skill tree. We added the Vile Pact, we added the piercing shots, the acrobatics, face acrobatics, we're gonna pick them up a little bit later while leveling. Got the feedback that early on, maybe not the most useful of things to grab it, maybe better to push it more towards merciless, so for now I'll just stick to that. Then, let's see, we can actually just contrast them. Oh yeah, they're up here, Elemental Focus. Not to be confused with Elemental Focus, the support gem. This gives you a 10% increased duration of elemental status elements on enemies. So freeze will last longer. The build shifted a little bit with in terms of focus. Or actually, you could better say it gained a focus. The previous version of this build guide, or Theorycraft, it's not a build guide. I haven't played it yet. I haven't completed it yet, so it's a theory. The previous version of the Theorycraft had Ice Shot for cold damage, and it used a Siege Ballista with physical to lightning conversion, with a hope of applying shocks with that. Well, that doesn't really work because you're just not doing enough lightning damage to make an impact on anything. So that's not working. So instead we use Vile Lightning Trap because that's the only guaranteed way in the entire game that you can actually shock something. It's really silly, but that is the fate of the shock mechanic. It's Vile Lightning Trap or bust. So we do have other mechanics left, and freezing, if you're doing 100% cold damage, then freezing is something that's pretty useful. The thing is, if you want to freeze a boss, you have the same limitations as with shock. You need to deal 5% of the max damage of the max life of that boss with a single hit, all cold damage, in order to freeze them. 5% of their life or more. Yeah, that's pretty difficult, because bosses have boatloads of life. The thing is, for every 1% of the maximum life of a boss that you deal in damage, you gain 60 milliseconds of freeze duration. And you need a minimum of 300 milliseconds of freeze duration in order to trigger the freeze. So normally that translates to 5% of the boss's maximum life. But if you increase the freeze duration that you cause with every bit of cold damage that you do, then you need to do less damage than because the duration is increased. So there is a little bit of math there that you can apply. But you got Elemental Focus over here, and you got Freeze and Chill duration up here. This is a 10% duration increase, and this is a 20% duration increase for freezing. For Chill, this is 30%, but I'm only focusing on Freeze. This is 20%. The Frostbite Curse also adds another 8% against bosses. Normally it's total 20% from the 20% quality on the gem, 20% what you add, but bosses have 60% curse resistance, so 20% against bosses it gets reduced to 8. Elemental Focus is pretty easy to pick up, so 18% increased duration. That means let's actually have a bit of a look at the boss freeze chart. Yeah, like that. So this way I'm actually looking at the right direction. So okay, I've now got things overlapping a little bit. Can I still point at it? My mouse cursor gets lost. Okay. Sure. So we have the 18% increased freeze duration. On the top right table, you see that maps over to 4.24% of a boss's maximum life that you need to deal as damage in order to actually freeze them. That or more. If you would also take the Fingers of Frost, the the wheel that I just pointed out up there, ooh, it actually still fits over the thing. So that's part of the Fingers of Frost wheel. If you also take that one, that's another 20% on top, then you actually only need to deal 3.62% of a boss's maximum life as cold damage in order to freeze them. So on the left-hand side, I have gathered some boss life numbers from PoEDB. If they are not accurate, well, blame PoEDB. For now, this is the only set of data that is available, so I'm just rolling with it. So the orange column is the normal amount of damage that you need to do to freeze them if you're not focusing on it. So if you're not using the any special nodes from the skill tree to increase your freeze duration, and if you're not using Frostbite, that's the 5% number. So, for an example, the very first boss, a tier 1 boss in the Jungle Valley, will have 132,000 life. You need to deal 6,600 cold damage to freeze it. If you have the setup that I'm going for, so that's the yellow column, that's the 18% increased freeze duration, then we only need to do 5,597 cold damage. So that's a good 18% less. Yeah, so if we need to do, that. If we go even further, if we go over the top and we also take the extra 20% from the Fingers of Frost, then we only need to do 4,778 cold damage to the boss to freeze it. If you do more cold damage, then of course the boss will be frozen for a longer period. So if you're effectively for crits, if you focus on added status element chance, then non-crits can also freeze. The thing is, it doesn't really matter because you really need your crit multiplier to massively boost your damage in order to make the damage even get into the range where it actually is viable to crit bosses. So in the bottom right, you see the version 2 level 71 versus a shocked boss. No, it's more or less ideal circumstances. Then we will be dealing 10,900 to 20,000 damage with a cold critical strike in cold damage. We will have a crit multiplier of 3, so that's 200% more damage from a crit, 50% from the tree, 150 from our bow. That means we'll be doing 32,000 to 61,000 damage per crit. That means we will be able to actually crit a lot of bosses. Surprisingly, if you ramp up on frenzy charges, power charges, flasks, dual cursing, the whole shebang, then you can actually deal quite some damage and you should be able to freeze some lower tier bosses. It only really gets an issue once we make it to the red maps, basically. Then things get hairy. But by that time, of course, we'll be using our endgame setup. Will be somewhere in the 80s, getting close to the level 89 endpoint of this skill setup. And we'll be doing 68 to 128,000 cold damage with crits. And then theoretically on a white red map, yes, that makes sense, we should be able to actually freeze Core Malachi. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that once you start adding map modifiers, then things really become a lot more dicey. But for lower tier maps, we should be able to crit bosses. That's basically the entire point I wanted to make here. So let's get that out of the way and go back. So the skill tree, we have... Yeah, we're just gonna actually start with a reduced version. So while leveling, we pick normal. This is basically what's relevant for the early part. We just pick the life nodes. We pick some Heart of the Oak for some more life. We're gonna go for Winter Spirit for 40% physical to cold damage conversion to make Ice Shot 100% cold damage. Drop down here, grab life from a thick skin. We will go for Fatality Void, and in normal we will not be doing a lot of damage, so we need the increased leech from Spirit Void in order to actually keep our mana somewhat stable. In the higher difficulties, we will slowly be refunding these points until we only have the hybrid node here left, and it should be fine in the end game. But early on, we need this in order to just keep our mana bubble in a reasonably sane state. For now, we'll while you are leveling into this direction, ignore the side things. No, you want to just grab your leech first. That's gonna be the goal. At that point, now you could increase damage a bit by Fangs of Frost. King of the Hill will help you increase your crit chances. More or less just doubles your crit chance, I believe. Right now, I'm about to pick up Spirit Void. Getting King of the Hill would boost my crit chance from, I think, 11% to nearly 19%. So we might actually be critting a little bit, and things like generating power charges via power charge on crit might become reliable enough that it might actually be viable. Might also postpone this for a little bit and then go first for Primeval Force. This is also a nice damage bonus. It depends a bit on what you need. If you are playing through the game and you are happily killing things, they don't need more damage, then you just advance along the path and you want to go for Herbalism first, just to get more life. And later on, Survivalist, boost your maximum cold resistance by 1, helps you deal with Reflect. Also, there's some evasion, there's some resistances here. So this is the defensive path. Whenever you feel like, yeah, I could use a little more damage, then it's going to be, now Fangs of Frost is probably going to be the first candidate because it's just a straight up bonus to your cold damage, and for 3 points you get 54% increased cold damage. That's quite a lot. Also you get 8% cold resistance penetration. Against white mobs, that's just 8% more damage. Against Axe bosses, they have 30%. They actually on normal they only have 15% resistance or something. So it basically helps you negate most of their resistances. Against rares that have elemental resists, it helps you deal with them a little bit. It's simply useful. Similarly for Primeval Force, it's 5% resistance penetration. That is pretty useful. The path up to here, it's 30%, 36% increased elemental. Another 20 here, that makes it 56% increased elemental weapon damage. You get 5% penetration, 10% reflect reduction, and 20% increased elemental damage while you're using a flask. So that is more useful once you get into the habit of using your flasks offensively instead of simply relying on life flasks. For this build, I'm gonna try in the end game to actually switch over to a pure utility flask setup, but we'll see about that. In the first version of the Theorycraft, I went with the bottom row, thinking that the chance to shock, freeze and ignite was useful. Now realize that if you're not critting, you're not doing enough damage to actually make these status ailments useful. So my thinking then was, yeah, it's only 2 points, it's 10% damage here, 12% damage there, but if you're not getting anything for that 5% chance to freeze, shock and ignite, you might as well go for the 12%. That's an error in the thinking that I have now corrected. It's a lot of things in the game. No, at first glance, it's like, hey, nice, 5% chance to freeze, shock, and ignite. Yeah, but once you get really deep into the mechanics, you realize that mathematically it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And you might as well just go for more raw damage because it actually helps you more, especially in a crit build. So, once we have a normal finished, then... Oh, and on normal, we're just going to pick Far Shot over here in the... For the Ascendancy, because our goal is to get endless munition, to get a large AoE and an extra projectile. That extra projectile is really, really nice to have. At least that's what I think. On Cruel, we are going to focus on getting more life and more survivability. So Golem's Blood, the entire life chain over here. We will go for Bravery, Art of the Gladiator. Art of the Gladiator just removes all movement penalties from our armor. It's just a nice to have. There's some life over here. Version 1, I actually went for Fury Bolts via the entire wheel up instead of via these 2 travel nodes. The thing is, it's 2 extra skill points to grab this. And as I've come to realize even more, if you're playing a ranger, you have no spare skill points whatsoever. It's everything you want to pick, you have to drop something else, and it always becomes a trade-off. So, yeah. So on the right side of the tree, not a lot changes. On the top side of the tree, we have piercing shots over here. I mentioned those before. And on Cruel, we're going to make our way over to Vile Pact to actually get that instant leech. And we're going to grab a Revenge of the Hunted just from the top side, quickly dive in and grab it. There is a weapon elemental damage penetration cluster here. That is something that will postpone until later because we simply want to get more survivability first. So then the next step is going to be preparing for maps. This is going to be a level 71 setup. So bottom left, we are going to grab Savagery for the Frenzy Chargers. I don't think we actually... Oh, we did grab that for Cruel. So we actually start grabbing some Frenzy Chargers. Before maps, we refund these leech points because we should be doing enough damage that we can only do what a single hybrid leech node over here. That just gives us 2 more skill points to spend on other things. Everything else here is just going to be the way it was. And importantly, we're going to go up here to get a life from a Blood Siphon over here, and we're going to get Blood Drinker. So all we're doing from Cruel to maps is get more life. And we're even going to grab the 2 nodes over here for life and evasion. So the entire goal here is that before you're going to enter maps, before you're going to do the most difficult content in the game, you have the highest life multiplier that your build can get. Because more damage is something that is easy to add on. And if you don't have more damage, then it simply takes you longer to kill things. But if you have less life, then it takes the monsters shorter to kill you, and that's a situation you really want to avoid. So we're going to end up at 169% increased life from the skill tree. From playing melee and casters and things like that, that's looking a little bit on the low end, but I've now come to realize that as a ranger, that's actually quite a lot. I've seen ranger trees with 140 or 160% life, and that scared the hell out of me. So for now, we're going to focus on this. So this is, before we're going to enter maps, this is what I want to try to set up. And after that, we're going to focus on increasing our damage. And this is where we really amp up our numbers. So we're going to grab Forces of Nature here, elemental damage and resistance penetration. There's an extra Frenzy Charge over here. There is... we got Trickery, we got Elemental Focus, I mentioned that before. We got Assassination, that's some crit stuff. We have Heartseeker over here, that's more crit stuff. We have Lethality, that's more crit stuff, and also a bunch of sweet crit multipliers. This has a crit multiplier. And by level 91, I think this went up by 2 points. Yes, of course, because we grabbed Flash Freeze. Not gonna grab this until later on, because early on damage looks fine and I'd rather focus on survivability. As always, while playing, my opinion of things might change, but this is how theoretically it looks. So let's have a look at the skills, because a lot of things changed in terms of skills. So Ice Shot, that's the first one. Ice Shot is useful, because that's the entire core of the build. Weapon elemental damage, it's still really good, because we're doing 100% cold damage. Weapon elemental damage synergizes very well. Slower projectiles, it's a more multiplier, so that's useful. Added cold damage, this is something that got a lot of feedback and a lot of negative feedback actually. That's something that is interesting from a theoretical point of view, because if I look at it, if I take added cold damage out, adding it to the build for the current setup will add 67,000 DPS. If I add physical projectile added, which is something that other people said like, hey, add that one, we only get 34,000 DPS. So 67, nearly 68, and 34. So added cold damage, it's almost double the DPS added from adding it to the build. It could be that a lot of the advice that people are giving, it might be based on them using a really good rolled rare bow that has different characteristics and for which physical projectile attack damage is a better support gem than added cold. For this build, theoretically, because no path of building is all theory, theoretically it's one of the best gems you can add. It's only second to weapon elemental damage. Slower projectiles is only nearly 45,000 damage when we remove it. Added cold is nearly 68. So it's even better than slower projectiles. Well, okay, so that little discussion aside, cold penetration, just really useful for just shredding those bosses. And increased critical strikes. It's, of course, we're a crit build, and especially because the crits we do are the things that actually, we'll try to freeze bosses with it. That's going to be one of the goals. I want to see if we can make a build that can freeze bosses. Whether it works or not, I don't know, but that's going to be the focus here. So it's just silly that it was not in the previous Theorycraft. So this is a 6-link. Slower projectiles is the easy one to drop in a 5-link. Simply because, well, you actually get faster projectiles out of it, and it's the least important one overall. Cold penetration. We are going to go dual curse, that removes a lot of elemental resistances. So technically, cold penetration you could also do without. The DPS done by both slower projectiles and cold penetration against a boss. This is all against the boss, the listed DPS here. It's equivalent. It's both 35,000 DPS that you get from adding them. So you can mix and match. You could say, no, if you're playing in a 5-link, no, you drop slower projectiles, keep cold penetration. And one thing that a lot of people mentioned as well is, please just take lesser multiple projectiles or greater multiple projectiles, because it helps you clear maps better. So my thinking here is that cold pen is green, the multiple projectile things are green. We're going to hot swap those just like you would do with an increased area of effect and a concentrated effect. While leveling, we'll just take cold penetration out, add lesser multiple projectiles, or maybe even a greater multiple projectiles. Depends a little bit on what feels better for clearing maps. Personally, once we have our full setup, once we have the Cruel Ascendancy, we're going to get an extra arrow from that. And the weapon I'm using is the Dev's... currently I've got a Dev's Harp. I have 100 silver coins that say that I want to make a Dev's Opus, so I'm really going to hope that Navali is going to be gracious enough to get me the correct prophecy. That's going to get me 2 arrows, otherwise we'll be stuck with a single arrow, bonus arrow. But effectively, if things pan out the way I want them to, we are going to get 4 arrows per shot without needing lesser or greater multiple projectiles. Got the feedback that even 4, you still want more. Personally, I'm not entirely convinced by that, but that's because I know that my playstyle differs quite a lot from other people's playstyle, and a lot of people, the argument for getting more projectiles might simply come from the fact that they want to zoom through maps really quickly. And of course, multiple projectiles that all pierce, it just helps you cover larger packs, more parts of the map more quickly. Well, I'm fine just going through things a little bit more slowly, a little bit more controlled and relaxed. So we'll see. It could be that just going for cold penetration, just increasing the damage per arrow, but having less arrows, is going to be fine. But for now, let's assume we got a dreamy 6-link. We'll add slower projectiles to it, and we'll move on. So we will support our Ice Shot with Siege Ballista, and I've renamed this to the Curse Ballista. That was a really good suggestion from, I think it was from Evo, but I've been going through so many good feedback from all of you that I might be mixing up names here. Suggestion was to remove Blasphemy and use Curse on Hit with Siege Ballista to apply curses with it. which is interesting because a Siege Ballista, it has a penetrating attack. It always penetrates, or it pierces, correct terminology. So it just keeps going until it reaches the end. We're gonna get 4 projectiles, which should also work for our Siege Ballista. So they will be shotgunning things. And I've been playing with Siege Ballistas with lesser multiple projectiles, so you only get 3 shots while leveling. And I really like it, because it really is like a mini shotgun. So if you get 4 projectiles, that's even better. And my thinking was, well, what's better than 4 projectiles? Well, we add another, I think 4 projectiles. So we're just gonna add a greater multiple projectiles to the Siege Ballista to give it a high amount of projectiles. And then Curse on Hit with Frostbite and Elemental Weakness. I got a lot of suggestions for Assassin's Mark. And the DPS between Assassin's Mark and Elemental Weakness. Elemental Weakness increases your DPS slightly. It's a 5% difference. It's a 5% difference. Assassin's Mark gives you more quality of life changes because it has a chance to generate power charges on killing enemies. It has some life and stuff that you get for killing enemies. Cursed enemies, that is. And it also increases the crit chance and crit multiplier of those that are cursed. So it's easier to crit things and you crit harder. But Elemental Weakness, of course, because you are stripping away the enemy's resistances, that also really is useful. As I said, theoretical DPS from Elemental Weakness is slightly higher than from Assassin's Mark, but the utility we get from Assassin's Mark might outweigh Elemental Weakness's damage. It's just a matter of try and see which works best. But for now, we're just going to go with the one that applies the highest DPS. Effectively, if we leave the greater multiple projectiles out, this is a 4-link, Siege Ballista, Curse on Hit, Dual Curse. Gonna add greater multiple projectiles. Depending a little bit on how fast things go, we might want a faster attacks in there if things aren't fast enough. And of course, we also have a lesser multiple projectiles that we can add if we want even more projectiles. For now, we'll leave this hanging as a 5-link. So that's utility. It's no longer the primary purpose of Siege Ballista is no longer to deal damage. It's simply to apply curses, and most importantly, it's going to be to curse bosses, because those are the only things that really will stand in our way. Then for our helmet, we're going to use a Herald of Ice and we're going to use Hatred. Before I had Herald of Ash in here, and in my playthrough you've seen me playing with Herald of Thunder. Both are out. We're going to use Hatred because it boosts our cold damage. If I want to freeze things, we need the maximum amount of cold damage, and Hatred provides. Also here, Ice Golem and Vile Lightning Trap. Then in our boots, cast damage taken setup, pretty default. Immortal Call and Phase Run to just give us a little bit of movement speed. And before there was an increased duration in here, I took that out because I needed space for Decoy Totem. Because, well, in case of panic, Decoy Totem is more important than cursing bosses. Let's just go with that. You might even swap them around to, especially, the initial setup is going to be Skirmish. So we'll have 1 Curse Ballista and we can actually have 1 Decoy Totem. If we want, we can get a second Ballista to replace the Decoy, but using both totems might actually be fine here. Lastly, for our gloves, we'll be using Frenzy with faster attacks. I'm going to use Power Charge and Critical. Our base chance to crit is going to be pretty darn high, so Power Charge and Critical should help us to generate power charges when we do critical hits and not necessarily when we kill. My biggest problem is, of course, if you're fighting a boss and there's not an add-on in sight, then all the charge on kill effects are not going to give you any charges, and you'll be out of frenzy charges, you'll be out of power charges. That's why I'm using the frenzy attack, because then we can just on hit get a frenzy charge. And power charge on critical, similarly, that is a reliable way to get power charges without having to rely on kills. So this allows us to drop Assassin's Mark in favor of Elemental Weakness. If we have Assassin's Mark, Theoretically, you could drop power charge on critical and put something else in here. For now, good enough. And blink arrow is of course going to be a movement skill that we use to get across obstacles. So that is all the... those are all the skill links. Oh, it's been revised a little bit, hopefully for the better. Dev's Opus is going to be our endgame bow, 2 additional arrows, 150% to global critical strike multiplier is pretty sweet because our crits will land hard. Skirmish for the extra totem. I got the feedback to, well, instead of a skirmish, maybe look at a drill neck, for example. Gets you... it gets us a 10% increased pierce chance, and it also gets projectile damage increased by 50% of arrow pierce chance. So it's just a damage bonus. So that would be a bit of a damage increase. We're going to go from 190,000 to 234,000 damage with the drill neck. So it's definitely a damage upgrade, but we do lose the utility because we can only have 1 totem up instead of 2. The thing is, of course, playing solo self-found. So drill neck is not relevant until I actually have a drill neck in my hands. And until then, drill neck is just a theoretical option. But if you have it, no, try it. Windscreen. No, for now we're going to go with it because it gives us an additional curse. Also, it's an armor boots, so it's really easy to roll red sockets on this, and that makes it easy to fit our cast when damage taken setup. Otherwise, we probably I theorycrafted this initially with sling boots, pure evasion. Not really the best of ideas. If windscreen is not something that you have available, and then probably it's better to go for 2 toned boots, because then you have hybrid boots. Then at least it's easier to roll some red on it. For the rest, the other items are simply just rares, just highest tier rares with evasion, with life, everywhere, and resists. And that's basically all you will want. On the amulets, the rings, you want to roll extra physical damage. So I realize that's something I discovered when I was crafting with my character. The physical damage ranges are not terribly large. Yes. This is actually a little bit of hot editing that's probably going to result in a damage increase. So, physical damage added to attacks. The top end, if you get a tier 1 roll with the best possible mods, is going to add 9 to 15 physical damage to attacks on a ring. 9 to 15. For cold damage, it's 22 to 40. That's more than double. That's almost 2.5 times that amount. That should theoretically result in a much, much higher amount of damage. So if we drop the physical damage added, boom, and we go with the cold damage, and I think it was roughly around here. Yeah, exactly. So if we replace the ring, if we just save it, we got ourselves 3,300 DPS bonus, which on 200,000 is not really that much. It almost gets us to 200,000, but it is something that is useful to keep in mind, that the added cold damage on your attacks is actually going to be more important than added physical. Simply because you are... No, it's a bigger number, and cold equals... or physical damage equals cold damage effectively for this build, because it all gets converted. And we don't really boost our physical damage all that much. A lot of the ranger nodes used to give you increased physical damage, and there are still a couple of them left. The Avatar of the Hunt is still physical damage. You have the bow wheel over here, that's also a bunch of physical damage. But the thing is, and over here, no, this is actually now damage with bows. This is no longer physical damage, but it used to be that there was a lot of physical damage, and now some of that has been converted to more generic bow damage. For this build, we are scaling our elemental damage, and we're just mostly ignoring the fact that it's a bow. Now this is just crits with bows, and there's a little bit of physical damage with bows, but it's mostly just the crits. This is all just elemental damage with weapons, elemental damage with weapons, elemental damage with weapons, cold damage with weapons. And up here, it's elemental damage and it's going to be crits. So for that reason, physical damage for this build, it might as well be cold. And especially if cold damage has a bigger range, then it's just going to be better for us. Well, for the amulet, we can do the same thing. But in the end, bigger picture is no, we're going to do roughly 200,000 DPS with this setup. Okay, so what? Yeah, 200,000. That's quite a lot. Is that something that we can sustain indefinitely? No, this is against bosses. So the configuration here is against the boss that assumes the target has 30% elemental resistance and 60% curse resistance. If we change this to a non-boss, we go from 200,000 to 300,000 because that resistance and curse, especially that curse resistance, really makes a difference. So for now, we're going to assume it's a boss. Is the enemy shocked? That is something that's on. We have Vile Lightning Trap for a reason. If we don't have a shocked enemy, our 200,000 drops down to 136. We have power charges, we have frenzy charges, and we have a reliable means of generating them. That is important. If we can't reliably generate them, then our damage would be a lot lower. Then we will only be at 84,000. But we can reliably generate them, so we can assume in our calculations that they will be there. Flasks, that's something that I haven't touched upon, even though I have had this screen open. We will be using a silver flask. I didn't order these in the proper order. So silver flask gives us onslaught. Onslaught makes you attack 20% faster, and it will make you move 20% faster. Also makes you cast 20% faster, but we are not casters. So of course, if we attack faster, that means we do more damage. Pretty simple. We will have a diamond flask. Your critical strike chance is lucky. Effectively, if you would miss with a crit, you can roll again and see if you can hit. It's a way of increasing your effective crit chance. It reduces the chance that you will miss with a crit. And that's it. In terms of damage, actually. Whenever we have a single flask on, we will actually be increasing our damage by 20% thanks to, what was it? Primeval Force, 20% increased damage while you're using a flask. So effectively, you will also always want to keep a flask up. Now, let's say we are not using flask, we're just clearing through maps. Then we're still doing 100,000 DPS against bosses, even if we're not using flasks, if we're not shocking the boss. So shocking plus flasks doubles our DPS. If we're playing against regular mobs, 150,000 DPS. So this is an insane amount of damage from my perspective. Now, my context is that the previous build that I've played, they never really went above 20 or 30,000 damage, and this is almost 10 times as much. So we'll see. Reflect is going to be an issue, but I hope that with Vile Pact we will have that mostly covered. But we will see, especially the first Reflect map we're going to do. That's going to be interesting. Let's just say it's going to be an interesting experience, and it's going to be slightly nervous. I'm going to be slightly nervous for that. I'm very, very aware of that. With that, I think I've really touched upon everything I wanted to talk about. So this is version 2 of the build. I have recorded this after episode... Let me peek at my list over here. I have recorded this after episode 5 of the playthrough. So this is after we have reached Act 3. So I think the skill tree is actually still good. I know early on there's not a lot of interesting things, not a lot of interesting choices. So I was already going for the leech here. So if you've been following along and you have had a similar amount of progress, then nothing has changed. But going forward, especially towards the end game, things are going to be different. And I hope things will be different for the better. But for now, I'm gonna thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.